September is Suicide Awareness Month, and whilst there's so much going on everywhere right now, you may have seen events created online to mark World Suicide Prevention Day on September the 10th, and indeed marking this entire month. That particular day is marked internationally through a collaboration between the International Association for Suicide Prevention, the World Health Organization, and the World Federation for Mental Health across more than 40 countries. And the aims of this month are to raise awareness of suicidal behaviours and how to prevent them, including promotion of action at national levels. Closer to home, leading mental health organisations such as the Samaritans, Mind and Young Minds, and the Mental Health Foundation, amongst many others, are working closely together to support anyone who's affected by self-harm, suicidal ideation, or by suicide. So that could mean any individual of whatever age who is so desperate that they're considering hurting themselves or indeed ending their lives, but also someone who's affected by something that's happened in their family, if somebody else has had those feelings or indeed has acted in that way. So children and young people are obviously a particular concern to all of us. So alongside you, we want to support this movement by joining the collaboration, and also to support you as the adults working on the front line with children and young people in schools and other contexts by making this short film as a resource for you. Of course, this year, to wrap around Suicide Awareness Month, we've got COVID, yet more uncertainty and more stress in different ways, multiple impacts, multiple uncertainties. And it highlights the inequality and different experiences, which some have described as going through the same storm together, but not in the same boat. And we know that some children's protective factors may have actually increased during lockdown, perhaps some of the children that you're aware of. For example, fostered and adopted children who've been able to build stronger relationships with their carers and parents without the additional stress of school, or those with comfortable home settings, happy relationships at home and sound finances who've been able to get more exercise, play, creative time, parental attention and fresh air, whereas others may now have got increased risk factors where the stresses of on their parents through mental health difficulties, unemployment, food shortages, job loss, discrimination, to be totally basic, rubbish broadband, poor housing, may have aggravated domestic violence, mental health difficulties, and addiction. And we know those children are in a dreadful predicament, isolated in a way through lockdown, and now coming back into school with all of that internalized experience that they've had to go through on their own. So research from the Mental Health Foundation has suggested that young people have found COVID lockdown more stressful than any other group, and that's of real concern to all of us. So despite the possible honeymoon period, whilst children and young people adapt to being back at school, those challenges are unlikely to go away. And they may not show up till later. The symptoms may be there straight away, but they may not be there. The signs that there's something amiss may not show up till later. Or they may be communicated through challenging behaviour. And if people just try to stop that and don't really explore further into what does that behaviour actually communicate, then that may go underground and the despair driving the behaviour may go unrecognised. So our job as adults is to stay aware and stay alert to the potential loneliness or despair that may drive some young people, some children, or indeed a colleague, of course, to consider taking their own life. And research from the Samaritans suggests that young people often don't feel they have a meaningful connection with anyone who could really listen or really get them in a meaningful way. That's such a distressing finding to feel that young people might have that experience. Nobody out there could really get what's going on for me. And even if I tried, kind of what's the point? So when that feeling's around, the choices can seem very stark to a young person and very limited if they're feeling that hopeless, that lonely, that isolated. And it may be that begins to drive them towards self-harm or even suicide, and certainly to be vulnerable to suicidal ideation. But what we also know, which is much more heartening, is that just having one adult to talk to, that adult who really does understand, who is willing to come alongside and to be open and to talk about these things and stay there and really try to attune and empathize with what's happening. That one adult can make all the difference, even just one person. So I think that is incredibly heartening for all of us to recognize. So what should we be looking out for? There are many signs and symptoms, and there are many websites that will be able to give you the information that will sharpen your awareness as to what to listen out for. Some things are very explicit, some things may be very subtle, and we'll learn best if we know the child, know the young person. But here are just some of the possible signs and symptoms. But everyone is different. There isn't a comprehensive checklist, and there could be so many more hints in how the individual is behaving, what they're saying, what they're not saying. Of course, we'll be able to notice these best if we know the individual pupil well. So if we're at all worried, it's always a good idea, as well as a safeguarding issue, to listen to our intuition, share our thoughts with other adults, and then seek advice. And if it's an emergency, to call 999 and ask for help. Papyrus is a UK-based charity with specific ideas about building suicide safety in schools and colleges. So you'll find a lot more suggestions and advice there, and some really great conversation openers as well to help you be very transparent, to help you to be upfront, because we can often feel very wary about how do I even start a conversation like that? Well, Papyrus is full of ideas, so well worth having a look at. And in school, any adult might notice changes in a pupil, which might suggest that something isn't right and could be the start of a gentle conversation. Anyone can be the person to start that.
I'm Sam Johnson. I'm a counsellor and psychotherapist. I've been working with young people since 2011, and I absolutely adore working with young people in a school setting.
Sam Johnson has worked with many suicidal young people and students with suicidal ideation during her years as a school counsellor, and she's written really movingly about her experiences and her particular creative approach, which includes enabling students' own music to become a bridge to their experience. You can find her article in the BACP Children, Young People and Families Division journal. It's really worth a read. Sam stresses that being open to the child or young person's experience is always our starting point. And whilst we need to be familiar with the common signs and language that might be used, we also need to be responsive to what the child or young person's actually presenting in the moment. And the most appropriate way, we need to find the most appropriate way to build relationships with them directly and indirectly, so that they can really sense our willingness to be alongside them, whatever they're going through. It's that will really make the difference. So, given that you've come across quite a few people in your work as a school counsellor over time, what I wonder is, what are the sort of particular signs or symptoms or clues perhaps that you've come across that you can think of over the years that have told you that maybe somebody is beginning to go down that line? Because I can imagine that it's not always as explicit as somebody saying, I'm thinking of killing myself. That's obviously a very explicit end of the spectrum, but what else have you picked up on?
Well, the whole question of suicidal ideation is quite a tricky one and a complex one. And I suppose rather than thinking, is this person on the edge, I try my best to be available and present and perceptive and willing to receive whatever it is that they have to share. So I think if I can remain receptive, then whatever messages are kind of bubbling inside will have a chance to reach me. So I think that in terms of signs, I think people take their lives for so many different reasons, and some of them are highly depressed and some of them aren't, that it feels important to say sometimes people suffer so much that they decide to end their own lives. So to try and exactly destigmatize it, because I'm never celebrating it, I'm never pointing to it as a wonderful way out, but I want to be able to hear genuinely about the suffering that might lead someone to that decision.
Mm.
And as far as, warning signs,
Yes.
it's tricky because some people are really good at hiding, and
Indeed.
that's
Indeed.
and that but so I guess more than having like a checklist, what I think might be more helpful is cultivating an attitude where you are ready in your own mind to think, wow, is this something that they're thinking about, and being
Yes.
comfortable enough to put that on the table. I think
Yes.
that that's really important,
Yes.
because I think if we get too stuck in our own minds about what the profile of a suicidal person is, then we might start shoving people in directions that they don't need to go.
Yes.
So I'm reluctant to do that. One of the most helpful things that someone is who might be contemplating that can experience is someone who can empathize with them in that very moment
Yes.
and not freak out,
Yes.
and not be the hysterical mother saying, oh, my baby, stay in the world for me, stay in the world for me, but someone who can have the strength to sit back and say, holy crap,
Mm.
that sounds hideous, and
Yes.
to be able to hear that hideousness.
Yes.
And paradoxically enough, if you can do that, that often actually reduces the young person's desire to end their own life because they've been heard.
Yes, indeed. And this is what we know, isn't it, from all the research around loneliness and isolation. I think that the Samaritans wrote a report on this recently in terms of young people's experience of loneliness. And one of the key things within that was not believing that anyone could understand them, not believing that anyone could listen to them at the
Mm-hmm.
depth that they needed. So
Yeah.
being able to see that if someone has arrived at that conclusion, then I must kill myself. In a sense, there is an awful logic, a horrendous logic in that. It's not because you're supporting it, but you're able to hear how awful someone must feel if that is the only logical step they can see. So you're in there holding it with them and
Exactly.
looking at it with them, rather than, I mean, all the safeguarding issues are here, and all the safeguarding issues that we need to take, the steps we need to take. Yeah. So I know that when you wrote the article in the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy Journal, and it's such an acronym, isn't it? CYPF, the Children and Young People and Families Fabulous Division, the largest and fastest growing division within the BACP. I hope they pay me for this plug. But it's a wonderful journal, and you wrote a terrific article there about your work with someone you've called Troy. And Troy is a summary person, isn't he? He's a summary young person. He's not any specific person, so we can speak about Troy. But you just tell us some of the things there that were important to you in your work with someone who you knew by that time to be suicidal, but you
Right.
wanted to work with him and meet him where he was. I think that was
Yeah.
one of the key things that really came over to me. So perhaps you'd just
Yeah.
like to tell us a bit about the trajectory of your work with him.
So Troy is a young kid, about 14, 15. I imagine him landing in my office, meeting him with the knowledge that he has posted a suicidal message online. And I know this because my manager has told me recently, but just given me a very brief summary of the situation. So we're worried. There was a message. People are afraid that he might hurt himself. Can you help? What's going on? Um, so this kid walks into my office, and it's so obvious from his body language that he is sort of suspicious and wary and very defended. He's not ready for a therapeutic encounter of the sort that I might be fantasizing about. He's shown up and he sat in the chair. And so what I end up doing with him is having a conversation where, first of all, I acknowledge that school is worried. I feel like if I don't say that, then it's hard to have a genuine rapport with him. I mean, the whole reason for our meeting makes no sense if we
And
pretend
also, it really
that
names things,
happen.
doesn't it? And I know that sometimes when people are very wary about talking about anything like this, then
Mm,
it's because, oh, if I say something, it's going to make it worse. But if you don't
mm,
say it, then there's already a lack of transparency. So being able
yeah,
to say the school is concerned about you, that
yeah,
names that, and it, in a sense, it upfronts your willingness to be open together, open with
yeah,
him. Mm.
yeah. So I kind of say that's why I'm there, and his response is, well, school are totally overreacting. It's not a big deal. What everyone's problem is. And so I try to meet him where he is and say, well, that may well be the case. And nonetheless, I keep sitting with him and I do my best to hold the awkwardness, to endure it, and to try to start making conversation. And as I do that, I mean, I am always interested in learning a bit about the young person's general interests, what they care about, what they love. That's really important for me to learn as a counselor. So, you know, I try to go there. He's quite reluctant, but when I say, you know, what do you like to do? You know, he says, go on my phone. Yeah. And then I ask, well, what do you do on your phone? Do you ever listen to music? And there's kind of a nod of the head. And we leave it there for the first day. But over the following weeks, we keep meeting and we end up just talking about music. And say, you know, I'll say, well, what have you been listening to recently? Oh, well, maybe I've been listening to Hollywood Undead. Who are Hollywood Undead? In this day and age, we all have computers easily accessible with the magic of YouTube. You just search it up. And I often just ask the young person to take control of the keyboard because they know about it better than I do. And they'll show me this piece of music and we can listen to it together. And that provides a chance for us to have a shared experience side by side. And they are being the expert and I am being the interested, curious observer. And in all honesty, I was absolutely floored by the content of the songs that these kids were bringing me, because some of them were about therapy. Like NF is this rapper who's inspired by sort of Christian movements. And anyway, I'd never heard of him before. He's got this amazing song called Therapy, which when I listened to with a student, you know, I just couldn't help but laughing because it was just too good to be sitting with this kid watching a rapper explain why for him writing music is like a therapy session, and being very mindful that that was kind of destigmatizing therapy for them. And sometimes they would talk about abandonment, they would talk about feeling, you know, there's a song by the Hollywood Undead, Believe. I encourage you to kind of look it up at some point. But the lyric, I can't believe that when I breathe, there's one good thing inside of me, just one good thing inside of me.
Wow. Yeah. And it's so graphic. You are sitting with a young person who is potentially suicide, and he's listening to a group called the Hollywood Undead.
Yeah. So I feel like, you know, it's it's a wonderful opportunity to get to know about the world of the young person. And again, these really delicate, difficult subjects can be discussed in a way that's playful, in a way that's a light touch.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, sometimes that will inspire, you know, a really deep conversation. Sometimes it will just be a way of acknowledging sometimes this happens.
Yes.
And you felt it, and I felt it, and it is horrible. But
Mm.
here we are together.
Yes.
It's not over yet.
And so something there about the fact that you've got this third focus, the two of you together, you've taken the focus off him in this moment because he's not willing to speak, he's denying it, he's pushing it away, he's saying that's not significant, the school is overreacting. that you've taken him seriously by taking what he values seriously. And I'm so reminded of Dan Hughes, of course, in this, because you're saying there is a playfulness in this, but there's also massive acceptance from you as to whatever state he's in. You're being curious about it, and you're empathizing with him, not only with him, but you're also empathizing together with a person who sings what, you know, there's nothing good in me. So you're embodying pace in this, if you're familiar with that acronym. So just if you could just tell us, you know, does that mean that with someone like Troy you would never talk about suicide overtly, or would it be
Oh no, I
something perhaps that
absolutely
would
would.
you were able to talk about it
I
overtly as
would.
well?
He
You
would
draw,
feel emboldened
yeah,
to discuss it himself, and I might ask questions. Okay, so how's it been this week? What's been going on? You know, how low has it been?
yes,
And I probe and gently invite that confession.
yeah,
But I'm very wary of, you know, giving him a questionnaire and saying, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how suicidal are you today? Because if someone asked me that when I was feeling low, that would just freak me out. That would escalate my sense of alienation and hopelessness. So I'm not going to do that. But I might use the word suicide. I might use the word, you know, killing oneself if they've led me in that direction.
you've done that, yeah, that's happened. You've talked about it as explicitly as that.
Absolutely. But I would follow their lead. I think it's so important to follow their lead.
What do you hope for them, really? What do you hope that they'll find by having a counseling relationship with you?
I suppose I hope that the young person that I work with who is thinking about suicide will have an experience of being met, being held, being engaged, and for them to experience my, I mean, it sounds so trite to say my acceptance of them. That's why you have to build a relationship, because why should they care if you as a counselor accept them unless you've built that relationship, right? So but there's something about, if any of us are deeply worried about a young person who might have made an attempt on their own life, might have talked about it, I think the single biggest gift that we can give them is our loving presence. To be able to endure, if we want to talk about it in person-centered terms, in terms of unconditional positive regard, great. If you want to think of it as a secure base in attachment theory, fantastic. But the point is that we can be there and we can experience our love for them and witness their suffering, communicate to them that we see their suffering, but in a way that doesn't throw the anxiety back onto them. And I think that that's one of the things that's so difficult sometimes for parents and teachers and even therapists, because we are afraid that they will make that decision. But there's something about working on our own fear and being ready to receive them. And I think that music is a wonderful way to open some of these really difficult conversations and give a young person an experience of being accepted in spite of those horrendous feelings. And perhaps a bit of sort of safe and thoughtful self-disclosure, not saying, you know, well, this happened to me, or da 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 da, but to speak from a point of one's own experience, to give them a sense that, oh, it is actually possible to go from this feeling back to having a livable life. That is actually possible. So I feel like our role is to remind them that that's possible and to keep holding on to the hope for them, recognizing that they might not be able to hold on to that, and saying, okay, so you can't do that. That right now I'm going to hold on to that hope for you.